Howdy, Smite fans. Welcome back to the SPL Weekly Recap. It's Season 9 of the SPL kicking off this past weekend. We had 7 different matches for you guys. So we're going to take a look back and see what all happened in this week's episode of the SPL Weekly Recap. We started off our week with the Camelot Kings up against the Atlantis Leviathans. And while the Kings brought out some new strats and showed off their macro play, the Leviathans' late-game team fights continued to reign supreme, outclassing the Camelot Kings for a 2-1 victory to the Leviathans. Our next matchup was the Olympus Bolts versus the Oni Warriors. The Battle of the Jungle was the topic of intrigue with these two teams, and throughout the set, that ended up being the main factor to find a victory. A reversal in game number 1 and a dominant performance out of the Bolts in game 3 netted them the win over the Oni Warriors 2-1. Our featured match of the week was our first one up on Saturday. That was between the Camelot Kings and the Olympus Bolts. Game 1, Venenu was given free reign in the mid lane. With minimal threat to the mid laner and no stopping Haddix, the Bolts were able to take game 1. While our second game gave Venenu yet another Zeus game to pop off on, Variety's Bologna became the oppressive factor that the Kings needed in game number 2. He and Captain Twig paved the path for the Camelot Kings to tie up the series. Game number 3, I'll summarize it by just giving you some raw damage numbers here. Big Man Tings, 50,000 player damage. Everybody else, not even half of that. Camelot Kings scooped up the game and the series with a 2-1 victory. And to close out our second day of play, we had the Jade Dragons up against the Solar Scarabs. Both games started off rather slow, but once we started to tip in towards the late game, it was the Dragons team fight that went unmatched. The Dragons' Cthulhu that came up in both games was just too oppressive for the Scarabs. It's Jade Dragons who walked home with a 2-0. Sunday kicked off and we had the Solar Scarabs up against the Valhalla Valkyries. The Valks managed to take game number 1 off the Scarabs, and in a pretty convincing manner. But that was the only thing that the Valks could get. Games 2 and 3 were completely in control of the Solar Scarabs, and they take home the 2-1 dub over the Valks. And our next set pit the Tardis Titans up against the Jade Dragons. Both games, the Dragons had difficulty breaching the backline of the Tardis Titans, with only a combined 2 deaths between Paul and Cyclone Spin throughout the entire set. The Titans took down the Jade Dragons with a clean 2-0 for their first set of the new season. Our last set of the week is one for the record books, the Oni Warriors and the Atlantis Leviathans. The Warriors' frontline carried them through a dominant game number 1 over the Leviathans to take the first game of the set. Then, in game number 2, the Warriors, on the back foot, were able to push the Leviathans back in a late-game team fight, and they would have won the game, if not for the fact that Panatom had sneaked behind them and backdoored the Titan from right under their noses to tie up the set. Game number 3 was back and forth the entire game, until one final Phoenix defense from the Warriors nets them a deicide. For the first time ever, the Oni Warriors are able to find a victory with a 2-1 over the Leviathans. And there you have it. Week number 1 of the SPL is all wrapped up. We had some great matchups, some unexpected ones, some upsets, and a couple little twists and turns along the way. If you ever miss out on the SPL, you can catch the weekly recap going live on our YouTube channel. But if you want to catch the games live, then you should be tuning over to our Twitch channel, where the SPL is going to be happening right after this.